For the past 18 months, a waste disposal company has been quietly going about a very controversial business in Western Australia's outback.
Welcome to Sandy Ridge, Australia's first geological repository.
Under this huge canopy, low-level radioactive waste is being buried forevermore. It's the first facility of its type in Australia.
What low-level radioactive waste do you take here? Everything
from critical minerals, byproducts, things from nuclear medicine, various basements and hospitals, even contaminated soil from some of the largest cities in Australia.
How much radioactive waste have you accepted so far?
Just in the last year, about over 6,000 cubic meters of low-level radioactive waste from all over Australia. And when you look at this cell, we're on the 12th lift. We've accepted about 100,000 tons of chemical and low-level radioactive waste since opening.
The private operator TELUS Holdings says it took 10 years to secure state government approval for the $80 million facility. CEO Nate Smith says the area is geologically suited for the disposal of dangerous waste.
So you want a place that's seismically stable? Sandy Ridge is built on one of the oldest rock formations in the world, the Yilgarn Craton. So what you don't want is you don't want to have groundwater that could potentially be contaminated by what you put inside your cell. So at Sandy Ridge, that's one of the unique parts about it, is there's no aquifer systems and no groundwater.
By building this waste facility, the private operator of Sandy Ridge has achieved something the Commonwealth has tried to do for decades without success.
Nuclear waste, what a disgrace! Nuclear waste, what a disgrace!
Federal government efforts to find a permanent home for Australia's low and intermediate level radioactive waste stockpile have been a divisive political headache. In 2004, plans for a facility in the South Australian outback were abandoned after the state Labor government won a challenge in the High Court.
You don't win if you don't try.
Given the court decision, there was nothing to be achieved by ploughing on.
10 years later, legal action by Aboriginal groups forced the federal government to abandon another proposed site in the Northern Territory.
They want this waste dump to come through. We're not going to let them, but we know we'll stand strong.
The latest Commonwealth push centred on farming land at Kimba in South Australia. The community was promised $30 million to host the facility.
People say it's bribe money, but to me, I don't care what you want to call it. If it's money coming to our community, stimulating our economy, call it what you like.
But the site was abandoned last year after the Bungala people challenged the proposal in court.
We prevailed, David and Goliath, and won the case for Bungala people and First Nations people.
With the Kimba proposal, the government deliberately excluded the local Indigenous people from the consultation. Wherever governments have tried to decide on a site and then impose it on the community, the proposal has fallen over.
Emeritus Professor Ian Lowe says the federal government needs to change its consultation style if it hopes to win support from traditional owners for any site chosen in the future.
Traditional owners are quite suspicious of anything nuclear because of the experience after the Menzies government allowed the British to test their nuclear weapons at Emu Fields and Maralinga. So I think it will take very sensitive engagement with Indigenous people to persuade them that the radioactive waste is not harmful.
The federal government is currently looking at future site options.
I am determined into the future, as we look to establish that a permanent disposal pathway for low and intermediate level waste, that everyone's concerns are listened to and taken account of, and in particular that will include traditional owners.
Australia's stockpile of waste is currently held at more than 100 sites across the nation, including Lucas Heights in Sydney, where radioisotopes are made for nuclear medicine and research.
We have almost 10,000 red drums of low-level solid radioactive waste. The kind of waste that is produced tends to be things like rubber gloves, or it could be paper towel, it could be contaminated personal protective equipment, and these things are then collected from all of our facilities and then stored in our red drums.
There's enough temporary storage space at Lucas Heights until about 2040.
Successive governments have kicked the can down the road and left it for the next government to look after, and that's really just been irresponsible.
TELUS CEO Nate Smith says engaging with Indigenous groups early in the process and giving them veto rights helped his company secure support for Sandy Ridge.
I think it's quite a bit of engagement, hundreds of cups of tea and coffee and sit-downs and pubs. We say, look, it's your land, and if you don't want us to proceed, we don't.
What royalties do traditional owners receive?
So that is under confidential agreement, but what I'll say is there's always a mix of aspirations when you go into a community. It's a mix of jobs, it's a mix of royalties, and it's also a mix of profits on sale.
There's now another headache for government: what to do with future high-level radioactive waste from Australian-built nuclear submarines.
I have to say that I'm very worried about the prospect of us having AUKUS submarines and having to manage the waste at the end of their useful life.
We are working on this, and there's no doubt there is a challenge, but it is a challenge we have to meet and we have to face, because we also have to pursue AUKUS to make sure that we keep Australians safe.
It would fit in that tiny little corner of the cell, the entire Commonwealth stockpile.
While TELUS Holdings isn't licensed to accept high-level radioactive waste, CEO Nate Smith says his company is prepared to take the entire low-level Commonwealth stockpile, including from Lucas Heights, and maintenance waste from US nuclear submarines, which will be docked in Australia from 2027 onwards. That waste is proposed to be stored at the Garden Island Naval Base in Perth.
There certainly needs to be a temporary maintenance facility at Garden Island, but I don't see any reason why we would want to store low-level radioactive wastes in a city near waterways when we have one of the safest places on the planet for low-level radioactive wastes available today.
The Minister says Sandy Ridge could be an option.
Well, we can't ignore the fact that in Western Australia there now exists a disposal site for low-level radioactive waste that has all the permits, all the approvals and everything it needs to do to operate safely.
But there are hurdles because of the location. There are bans across the country on the transport of some types of radioactive waste.
Ultimately, as a Commonwealth decision maker, I have to go through the appropriate processes to reach a final decision on this, and that decision is not imminent.
But the Minister says it's crucial a solution is found.
I'm very confident that we will eventually get a permanent disposal pathway for low-level and intermediate-level radioactive waste in this country, because it is essential that we do so.